Hello, everyone. This is Tom, and it's nice to join you all, even though I can't do it by video. Welcome to our conversation today, titled Disability Inclusion, a key ingredient in a diverse and inclusive workforce. At the 2020 Harkin International Disability Employment Summit, we released a white paper describing how the investor community and disability community can work together to improve employment outcomes for persons with disabilities in competitive integrated employment. You can find the paper on our website. One of the recommendations in that paper was to promote dialogue between the disability community, investors, and the private sector to foster greater understanding of the challenges faced by persons with disabilities in the employment space, while recognizing the value creating opportunity for the private sector when it achieves competitive integrated employment. So in the coming months, we plan to hold 7 work sessions, bringing together thought leaders in these different sectors to learn from each other, grow together, all with the goal of fully integrating people with disabilities throughout all levels of all companies. Each session will explore a different topic related to employing people with disabilities. At the end of the 7 sessions, we will review what we did and what we have updated recommendations for action. And we'll share videos of all the conversations to be used as a resource for continued learning and growth. The Harkin Institute has planned these sessions, these discussions, in partnership with Goal 17 partners and Global Goals Advisory. I cannot thank them enough for their leadership and support. A special thank you to the members of the Planning Committee, Robert Ludke, Susan Myers, Julia Cox, Jessica Turco, and Eddie Nadapu. I'm excited to welcome you to the first of these discussions. Like all of you, I know that in this moment in time, it's more important than ever to make strides in employing people with disability as we continue to face a global pandemic and a reckoning on social justice issues throughout all of our societies. I know my good friend Caroline Casey is with us today. Caroline and her team at the Valuable 500 are working to put disability on the leadership agenda of businesses around the world. Just this week, they formally announced the 500 companies that have signed on to engage in this work with them. Caroline, a huge congratulations to you and your team. I cannot wait to see where your leadership and this momentum will take us. So Caroline will introduce you to the other speakers and we'll kick off today's conversations. Again, I thank you all for being here, and I look forward, if I can't see it, at least listening to the discussions.
So, welcome everybody. And Caroline, that was a nice congratulatory message from Senator Harkin. Congratulations from all of us. Did you want to sort of give a woot woot and say?
I'm sitting here trying to be quiet going, firstly, thank you. Yes, it was a big moment and I have a big smile on my face. I would not taking over your space, James. I believe you are introducing us all.
I know, but I think that was a message from the senator and a big moment. Everyone's entitled to do a self woot woot every now and then. So
yes,
congratulations.
Thank you. And for those of you who can't see, I have a massive smile on my face matching the woot woot. So sorry, over back to you, James.
All right. So hello, everyone. My name is James, and And I think it's worth starting with, we are having this panel on the 1-year anniversary on the murder of George Floyd. And I think it's hopefully some small consolation to his family that his death, combined with a lot of incredible other existential crises that we were living through, has triggered finally a long overdue conversation, and more importantly, actions on systemic inequities that have existed in the world for decades, hundreds of years. We're sitting here today thanks to the generosity of the Harkin Institute and Goal 17 and Global Goals Advisory, in the first of 6 panels that will hopefully change the mindset and language of what it means to be inclusive for people with disabilities, right? To talk about it in terms of economic terms and productivity terms, and using different dialogue to show that there's true economic, in addition to moral, but economic justification for creating incredibly inclusive environments in corporate forms for people with disabilities. And in truth, after 6 panels, I'm hopeful everyone will see that the mark of an incredibly agile, innovative company will be those that have organizations that allow all their employees to be at their best. So with that, my name is James Rhee. I am your narrator, your moderator. And my background quickly, because I'm the least interesting of the 4 people that you'll be listening to. I've worn a lot of hats. I've managed billions of dollars of capital as a private equity, distressed and growth guy. I spent the last 8 years, actually, I was so distraught at the systems that we're going to be talking about that I actually walked away from that career in my life in Boston to become a first-time CEO of a business that was servicing one of the most othered groups in the world, which are Black women, moderate income, plus size individuals here in the United States. And I think we worked some magic by bending lots of systems and showing the world that one can do it. And right now I'm still investing under the tent of Red Helicopter. I am a faculty member in the Organizational Leadership Center at MIT Sloan, and I'm going to be the next incoming chair of entrepreneurship at Howard University. So sort of living a life of making new friends and new alliances. My guests and the more interesting people today, you've already heard from Caroline Casey, who gave the woot woot. She, I think it's fair to say, has lived a life that has shown the world of what's possible. And I've admired her just getting to know her and researching her resolve, and more importantly, her actions. And it's been inspiring, but also she's the founder and CEO of the Valuable 500. And so she's putting her words and inspiration into action. My other guest is Dr. Susanne Bruyère, who is the professor of disability studies and the director of the Yang Tan Institute on Employment and Disability at Cornell University. That's a mouthful, but from what I've been reading, is that she is a policy / research / just thought matter expert on things that that blur the lines between not just the future of work within work, but future of cities and future of living. And I'm looking forward to hearing her comment on that. And then we have Merrill Friedman, who is the Senior Director of Disability Policy Engagement at Anthem. I love her background because she's also been a private sector CEO. She's been private and public. I think my favorite part of her background, though, was that she was the interim director for a foster care not-for-profit for really at-risk youths, which thank you for doing that. It really, yeah, I think enough said. So there we go. So let's start right off and go into this. And Caroline, you're up. All right. So the Valuable 500, for those of our listeners and panel and viewers who do not know what the Valuable 500 is, could you provide just a very quick synopsis of what you've achieved in very short order, and maybe put some framing around the economic issues that we're talking about in terms of dollars, population, and potential dollars of impact that you're trying to drive?
I will. Thank you, James. And I'm Irish and an over talker. So if I'm talking too long, you tell me to stop. So I'm going to give a bit of an audio description for those of you like me who are visually impaired or registered blind. So I am sitting in front of a sort of pale green background. You cannot see my washing machine. I'm a white Irish woman with very blonde hair. I have ocular albinism. I'm registered blind, and I have black glasses that look like Edna from The Incredibles, which I kind of love. And I have a very yellow pale shirt with a lot of dog paw marks on it, which you can't see. So why the Valuable 500 was formed? Essentially, disability has been on the sidelines of business for far too long. The disability inequality crisis is way too large and vast for governments and conventions and charities alone to resolve. And so the Valuable 500 was, its sole purpose was, with the power of the leaders of business, was to equalize disability within the business system, right across the supply chain. We know the transformative power of business. We know all of that today. But CEOs have been the missing piece. Leadership from the top has been the missing piece of integrating disability inclusion. CEOs are some of the most powerful leaders on our planet at the moment. They can make change happen in minutes, hours that politicians may take a lifetime. Before the Valuable 500, believe it or not, despite the fact that every single one of us is touched at disability at some point in our lifetime, despite the fact that the 1.3 billion people with a mother and a father is 70% of our global economy, despite the fact that this community of which I am part of is 13 trillion in revenue, despite all of that, despite the fact that disability inclusion is a source of innovation for so many organizations and tools to which we use today, that has delivered billions of dollars to the bottom line, such as remote controls for television, which were designed for visually impaired people, or text messaging for people who are hard of hearing. If we don't even need to have something else to say, Apple is the first company in the world to trigger $1 trillion, and right as a source of that is universal design. And so much of the Apple products are used by the disability community. Now, despite all of that, we haven't had CEOs, never one, believe it or not, never one, stand with and for this disability community. We know that 7% of our CEOs have a lived experience of disability, but 4 out of 5 of them are hiding it. Why? Well, I hid my disability until 21 years ago, until I was working with Accenture, hiding the fact that I was registered blind. I came out of the closet. Why has things not changed? Well, leaders make choices, and those choices create culture in the shadow and the light of a leader. So the cultures haven't really changed. Why weren't leaders standing up? Was it because they were worried or frightened? Like all of us, they're human beings. Or did they not actually understand the extraordinary brand, insight, talent, and market that they were not touching? Is it because too many other things were competing? Well, that was the Valuable 500's job. Number one is to educate them, but secondly, to get the attention and intention of 500 of the world's most influential CEOs and their business brands to put disability on their leadership agenda and take accountability for it, accountability for the journey ahead. Not to say they were great, but to say we need to do more. It's okay they didn't know anything, but it's not okay they did nothing. It is not okay that 90% of our companies publicly who claim to be passionate about inclusion, only 4% consider disability. That's a delusion. We have to end a categorized approach to diversity and inclusion, which has often left disability on the edges. You cannot have hierarchy of inclusion. You can't. It's either inclusion for all or all for anyone, or not at all. And so we need the leaders of the world. And we launched it on the main stage of the World Economic Forum in 2019. And everybody said we couldn't have the main stage. Who were we? What was disability? What are you talking about? You should go into the special sessions. No. With our Paul Pullman, who is our chairman, the ex-CEO of Unilever, we did, against all the odds. And on the 18th of May, which is this day, last week, we announced our 500. And today we represent 20 million employees, 35 countries, 64 sectors, 500 board level commitments, the power of 500, huge supply chains, and 8 trillion in revenue. And in announcing on that day that we are now the biggest business move for disability inclusion ever in the world, well, why would we stop there? And we announced phase 2. More on that later.
So Merrill, like, you have been a leader with courage in your career. It's been clear reading your bio. So you're at Anthem. You have a bird's eye view. You're a signatory to the Valuable 500. but you also have a bird's eye view on a lot of different companies, right? About what's going on within their employee bases and their orgs. What is the veto, but why more people, more CEOs jumping on this to sign and pushing Caroline to call it the valuable 1,000? Like, why isn't it happening more?
I was just thinking, it's funny that you said 1,000. I was just thinking that. First, let me give a little description of myself. I will also go with the ish and talk too much, but it's Jewish and talk too much. So very much like Caroline. And I'm sitting in front of two pictures of some jazz artists from New Orleans and my signed frame of former President Barack Obama's signature when I was appointed to the Commission of People with Intellectual Disabilities, and then various other tchotchkes, if you will, sitting behind me. I have formerly black curly hair that is now gray curly hair, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Thrilled to be here. Thank you. You know, it's interesting. I think I remember, when Senator Harkin, reached out and said, we want Anthem, to sign on. Have you heard of the Valuable 500? This is what it's about. And I was like, sure, my gosh, why is this even a question? And then of course, took 2 seconds and went, oi, let me check. Right. Because you really have to navigate, large companies. Fortunately, Anthem, we said, yes. We're going to figure this out. It takes all of us. And so we really appreciated the process and, have really been able to augment and enhance what we've done already. I'll speak more to that later. But I do think companies are still thinking about, what does it mean? How do we ask the questions, right? We hear that all the time as people with disabilities, how do we ask you if you have a disability? I'm like, you don't. Right? You build an inclusive culture, you hire the best talent, you get intentional about where you're hiring from, who you're networking with, right? And then it comes to you. And I think it's going to be, it's a process for other companies, other CEOs to see 500 companies doing this to get to the valuable 1,000. And I think as companies, as CEOs start to talk, and I think that's part of the magic, right? In the valuable 500. It's the CEO's responsibility. It is a CEO leadership thing, right? To bring other companies along, and CEOs need to talk about it in their board meeting, like you, other CEOs sitting on boards, hearing this, seeing this, and seeing the value of diversity and inclusion. I think that's where we'll get the change, but it always takes people to take the first couple of steps.
Yeah. I mean, Susanne, how about you? So when you think about these company transformations, I think one of the things that sometimes goes on is that there are a lot of competing, perhaps, ears and interests in inclusion, right? So in the last year, there's a lot of talk about racial inclusion, gender inclusion, if disability inclusion there. And sometimes, from my perspective, sometimes it gets competitive because organizations are structured in a way that sort of foments that sometimes. And sometimes other organizations are more circular in nature. So there's much more agility within groups, and they tend to get broader things done while also serving individual needs. From your experience, what have some of the better companies been able to do, or better municipalities? What are some of the organizational dynamics that you've seen that have engendered greater productivity in terms of disability inclusion?
Thank you, James, for that really great question. And I will also describe myself. I'm an early 70s woman with very white hair, very short hair, a red jacket, a white sweater, and pearls. And I'm Caucasian. What we've learned over many years of observing organizations is that it really takes a very multifaceted approach. I think the most successful changes we've seen is when, like Carolyn is doing in engaging the valuable 500, the CEO is committed to this, and that it's embedded in, at a minimum, embedded in the diversity initiatives of the organization. But it really needs to be articulated by the top CEO and embedded in all facets of the organization. That means that the recruiters are educated about this is a target population. The human capital development has a target that they set. That the communications people embed a disability presence in everything they do for the organization so that it's very visible and that you engage everyone in the organization, the first population being people with disabilities and their allies. 1 in every 4 American households has a person with a disability in it. So when employers say we really don't have people with disabilities in our organization, they're wrong. They're there. They're there and their allies are there. And by making disability a part of the goals and vision and mission of the organization, you're really beginning to bring out the fabric of the employees to support workplace disability inclusion. And it's not just HR supervisors, recruiters, human capital development, it's everybody in the organization. And when you bring in people with disabilities and their allies, it's much easier to start building a backbone that will support true workplace disability inclusion.
And the question to all 3 of you, just a question of curiosity. Have you seen organizations that are particularly overachievers doing really well on inclusion in certain verticals, but they're really failing in other verticals? Or is it generally correlative that if you do a pretty good job on inclusion in one vertical, your efforts in other verticals are pretty good too? Or do you see stark dichotomy as well where they're completely not correlative?
I'll take the first toe in the water here. I don't know that I could make a broad brush statement here, but I do know that in some companies we speak to, right, they're very intentional in, let's say, increasing their numbers of, right, a population, let's say women or, people of color, people with disabilities. And so in doing that, they're going to advance or increase their, associate diversity for a population. And it doesn't necessarily correlate across the board, even when we address intersectionality. So I don't think that is correlative across the board. But again, I don't have a worldwide view of that.
Yep. Okay. One of the things I captured in all of your answers, and I never introduced myself in terms of what I was wearing. I'm wearing a purple shirt. It's linen. It's too early to wear it. I'm not supposed to be, but I am. I'm 50. I have like 3 gray hairs, even though I'm 50. I am Asian, which may have something to do with that. I don't think I look particularly 50, but I am 50. And I'm an Asian man, and that's why when I mentioned to you that I was running a business for Black women and entering to Howard as the entrepreneurship chair, I'm hoping that everyone in your own minds can sort of smile and think about how maybe that there are some friendships and different groupings that could advance some agendas forward over the next 50 years, that it's going to require some new friends. So, just moving on in terms of in terms of employing people with disabilities. I mean, so Merrill, I'm an investor, right? So I'm supposed to be finding alpha. Like I like to find differences so that my returns, both as an investor in people and in money, they over-index performance. Because if I'm investing in the same things as everyone else, life's not just boring, but you get mediocre returns, right? So within Anthem, and it's a wide tent in terms of disabilities, how are you operationalizing, sort of bringing out the best in each disability group so that they can really perform and provide alpha for the company? What are some things that you are seeing?
Oh, I love this question. Let's see if I can narrow it down to not take up. This is a day-long session for companies. A couple of things that I think are really very critical. One is, we've all talked a little bit about allies, but allyship is so incredibly important. Allyship is what really is the foundation for inclusion and acceptance. So for me, when I look at Anthem and, what we're doing and what we've really done, starting last year, right? We've already acknowledged the murder of George Floyd, and that's just one step in moving forward. But we started listening and learning sessions across our business resource groups. We brought all of the business resource groups together right, in various listening and learning and allyship discussions, because we needed to learn from everybody. We needed to create the space where everybody had a say and a support and a role in moving forward. So we start there, and then we're also very intentional, in other areas. We have internship programs designed specifically for undergraduate and graduate students with disabilities to open that pathway. We have we work with Project Search, which is very, specific to supporting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, specifically high school students, to get that practical on the job experience. And then we hire from Project Search a little bit, to quote Amanda Borman, which I can't do her justice, but if you can see it, you can be it. We need to set the stage, whether you come to work with a disability and you become an advocate, right? And you are out there and you are promoting, or you come to work with a disability and you do your job and excel. Either way, you are part of making change, right? And so all of those steps lead up. We streamline our accommodation processes, right? Because if you come to work with a disability and you can't get the accommodations that you need, you're not going to stay, or you're going to stay and feel unsuccessful. So we have to streamline our accommodations process. And, we love that. We love the results of that, because people have an easier time getting the accommodations they need. So it's continuing to take the steps. Even if you feel you're doing it, doing it well, talk to your associates, because you may find areas for improvement. In fact, I'm going to guarantee you're going to find areas for improvement. And that creates change. It also creates that buy-in and ownership for associates, saying this is a place that values my opinion as an associate, and they value my opinion as a person with a disability. So I am part of change making. I am part of inclusion and diversity here. So I think those are just a couple of things. I want to hear from our colleagues. I'm sure we'll have opportunity to say more about that.
Carolyn, how about you? Very clear, and I agree 900% with you. It starts at the top, right? Your message is very clear. CEO, leadership, it just has to be. But so to get to the valuable 1,000, so help me out. So I'm talking to the other CEOs, and they say, well, I am the boss, but I also have a board, right? And the board's a fiduciary to shareholders. Maybe can you help with some stories about from what you're seeing over the last couple of years of some really great success stories and early momentum? It's been 2 years, but you're having a great impact. So what would be some things that you might say to a CEO on the fence to say, look, these are some early results from, without naming specific companies? What are you seeing pattern wise?
Well, firstly, it actually often doesn't start with the top. It just needs the top. There are, I think there are a lot of people within the business doing really good stuff, okay? And it's not accelerating. We're not seeing the scale change because it doesn't have the intention for the top. I also think diversity and inclusion, and we heard Susanne mention it can't be sitting in CHRO functions. This is across the supply chain. Yeah. It's right across strategically everything that we do. Whatever happens in the business, it needs the support at the top to give the investment and the permission. The Valuable 500 it's not putting it all upon the CEO, but it's saying that the CEO is accountable for the action and the investment that happens. So that's number one piece. What do I say to CEOs? Can I just be really clear? We talked to 5,000 companies. 500 said yes. Now, so as we celebrate this moment and this milestone and move into phase 2, so we are going to mobilize this community of 500 companies with the support of their CEOs in the business to really drive system change in 6 key areas in business. But we only got 500. Don't think that was easy. That was not easy.
Yeah.
5,500. Now, what turned people? And this is this is not one people want to hear, because it's not simply about money, because the business case has been made for diversity and inclusion all of our lives. What I am saying, the 13 trillion and the consumer piece, that is resonating, because you can't serve that market if you don't have that intelligence in your business. Great, that is working. We all know that the digital acceleration, because of COVID, that's making huge inroads. I also think this accommodations that Merrill was speaking to and simplifying that, well, we had to accommodate all our employees, not just disabled employees. So that's helping. But you want the really big thing that gets them off the fence? You are a mother. You are a father. You are a sister. You are a brother. This is yours. This is everyone's. To Susanne's point, 1 in 4 households in America have somebody with a disability in it. Let me remind you again, it's 70% of our global economy is touched by it. And when you bring, and I know this might sound cliched, but when we bring in the combination of the stats and the science and the business case and the humanity and the story of human beings, because the business is designed by humans, it serves humans, it makes money from humans, it makes philanthropy from humans. That is what got the CEOs over the edge, is when it was the potent combination of 2 clear things. And as we move into this decade right now, after COVID, you can't use one or other. The most successful companies that have thrived through COVID have a balance of both, it's intersection of both. And I really think the leaders who are engaging in the Valuable 500 are looking to that new, more sustainable, human-centered leadership. And to your board members and to your investors, I will say this, the greatest innovations to which your companies invest in that are delivering huge billions of dollars come from a different lived experience. If we design from the extreme, then we have an opportunity to deliver serious money to the bottom line.
Caroline, we're just meeting on this call today, but I just want you to know that I wrote in the HBR piece about what I did with the Ashley Stewart. There are 2 guiding lights. CEO needs to check both boxes at the same time. The whole culture does. It was kindness and math.
Yeah.
I think that's what you're talking about. There's a real business reason, and to not be ashamed or to really accept the human aspect of being a member of the human race, right? It's really that life that I think that in the COVID environment, we're all understanding the work-life distinction. It was a mirage, right? It's just one fluid life.
I think there's an intelligent magic. So right at the core of the Valuable 500 community is this idea, you call it kind math, which I'm loving. We call it intelligent magic. And I'd love to hear what Merrill and Susanne have to say, because I guess Susanne particularly, it's that the businesses that are thriving is the processes, of course, and the frameworks and the structures, but the magic is the piece about the human being. And we are thirsty for that. So you have to have both. And that's where I think if you really want to see the delivery to the bottom line, it's not one or the other, it's both.
You know, it's so interesting because I'm not one to really sit around and glorify pandemics and say there are silver linings. However, you know, what you have seen is, you know, people on Zoom and a child passing by, a spouse passing by, a sibling passing by on these calls. And it has brought, I mean, it has humanized the people that work in companies, your colleagues, your associates, your friends that you might not have even known much about. You didn't know they had disability in their family. And then we've also brought around that conversation around mental health disabilities, so apparent disabilities, but that, we're talking about mental health, whether people had mental health conditions and experienced them prior to the pandemic or experiencing some fear and anxiety, and depression throughout the pandemic. This is all part of our disability culture and identity, and that's happening in front of our eyes on video calls. We were talking before that didn't show up on the old flip phone call when we were just talking to people. And I think that's going to help bolster that human piece, right? That adds to whether it be bottom line or ROI or, the math conversation. But Susanne, please weigh in.
Sure, absolutely. This is a really critical conversation. A couple things occur to me. One is, we look at what are the practices that are the most potent in getting people into the workplace. And one of them is internships for young people with disabilities. When companies have internships for people with disabilities, they are 6 times more likely to have successfully hired people with disabilities in the last year. And part of that, is it's low risk, it's less risky to them, but it's also an acculturation of the workplace. Not only are they giving people an opportunity to plump up their resumes and they're doing something for their community, but that they find that it changes the culture of the workplace. Supervisors are less intimidated about their ability to interact with people with disabilities, about being able to accommodate, and they're able to be up close and personal, seeing how capable and energetic people with disabilities are, and it really begins to change how they view things. We also see, you know, and this is sort of an example of that in these Autism at Work programs, an amazing re-energization of these teams that these neurodiverse individuals are put into. I've had colleagues who are working in these settings say, you know, I've been at this organization 25 years and I've never felt as good about the company I am working for as I do now. And I feel good about my own job because I'm going to work and I feel like not only am I carrying out my tasks, but I'm helping individuals who might not have gotten another chance to really see their skills blossom in my environment. And I'm a part of that and I feel good about that. So it's this kindness equation, but it's really, it's attached to the business case. It's attached to the mission of the organization. And it's making everybody realize they have something to contribute to make the workplace a better place to be in.
Let's hope a lot of these sentiments and remembrances stick and people don't forget this as things open up again. We, as a human race, we tend to do that, sadly. So let's hope we all serve as leaders to remind people to not forget. You know, one of the things that it really troubles me as a private equity investor, and one of the reasons why sort of my life has been hybrid, also teaching and being with people and running a company, was that in business schools and a lot of CEOs, you are taught the way things are structured that people, it's an expense, right? It's a real mindset. It's an expense gap. Makes you book it as an expense. So it's quantified as an expense. It's not capitalized, right? So computers are capitalized, but people are expensed. That's just the rule. And people are generally perceived in some organizations as liabilities, not as assets. So in my view, one of the key things is to trigger a complete mindset shift in all of this, which is really hard to do. So what are some of the ways that you all are seeing that where people are starting to treat people as assets and not as expensible liabilities?
Well, can I just jump in with, let's just do a quick story. Role modeling and examples is when it becomes real. We can sit and have this great conversation forever and go, oh yeah, la la. Okay, so Richard Branson, when he started talking about dyslexia, that was a reframe. Now, Elon Musk has just come out, what, nearly 3 weeks ago, and declaring his Asperger's. Like, do you know what that is doing very subtly to the framing? You can have all the great films and great inspirational moments and blah, blah, blah. But when a leader owns that part of themselves and that differentiator, actually an awful lot of entrepreneurs, I don't know, James, I don't know, do you know, but an awful lot of entrepreneurs have lived experience of disability, which they don't speak about. And I think for me, the only way that we are going to change these ideas in our heads is when we start speaking to the truth of what is really out there and start abolishing these extreme sort of fictional characters of the inspiring disabled person, the freak disabled person. Listen, you know, Elon Musk is also probably A-type personality and also happens to have Asperger's. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I think this singularity identity thing is very dangerous. And that's why I'm really excited when we talk about, like, I'm a woman and I have a disability. Which part of me do you want to do business with? I hope both.
Totally. Yeah, all of our brains are wired to just look at A. It's the way our brains are set up, like just biologically, A or B. And I think what we're talking about here is why not F and G and Y? Like, why not those letters? Those are good letters too.
When I do disability competency training or inclusion and diversity discussions, I use the very technical terms of we are a mishmash, right? Some people will say we're not monolithic. I think we're a mishmash. We have several identities, several, skills, even personalities that we bring to whatever we're working on, right? And whatever we're doing, whether it be in our personal lives or our work lives. And so F and G, I think, are the best letters, right? If we're going to go that route, because we all have, I mean, there are times that I'm in a meeting and I have one part of my personality that may be more dominant at that particular time, right? At other times it's another. And yep, I'm a woman and I have ADHD and we have disability in our family. And we talk about it. And the more we talk about it and the more we talk about it, the more we create space for others to step, into that as well, that discussion. And it's great that we have people in Hollywood that are identifying with mental health disabilities these days and talking about eating disorders. We need to have these conversations, but people will still see some of the Hollywood discussion as Hollywood, right? We need it here, we need it home, we need it local, we need it in our businesses, because the stigma in business is still going to be different than what we're trying, right, to talk about. So we have to do this in the workplace to really create that change.
Can I ask a technology question? And shame on me if none of you is going to leap at this. And I'm not a software expert by any means, but my exposure to the software systems in terms of the HRS systems are the major enterprise software platforms making disability inclusion easily scalable? Is the coding there? Are the modules there for people to execute on this on scale? Does anyone?
I'm going to jump in real quick, and I think each of us needs to probably talk a bit about this. I think one of the other positive things about the pandemic, it has pushed platforms big time, so that a whole host of people with differences could equitably participate in what was business's big push to try to keep things going. So that has helped us. We've also, we talked a bit about universal design, but we're also talking now about inclusive design, really having people who have the lived experience be a part of the dialogue. Mm-hmm. And we see that in education. I'm in an educational setting in that we have something called Teach Access now. And Teach Access is a great example of its association made up of universities and industry representatives. And they're not only talking about inclusive design, but they're talking about how do we make sure that the designers of the future understand about universal design, accessibility features. And so it's only when we have these grassroots people beginning to design things from the ground up that's going to make a difference. And so that's why this organization exists. So I'll pause there and let Merrill and Carol.
I love you talking about that, Susanne. I'm sorry, I just have to say that is where this is amazing. This is the collaboration, because what Teach Access are doing is giving that education from the young designer right up. And actually Teach Access and Verizon are helping, or we're helping them scale it outside the US around the rest of the world. So that collaboration is exciting. And then on the flip side of it, the reason we need it is, can you believe in the FTSE 100 companies, 1 in 3 of them do not have accessible websites in this day and age? Mm-hmm. So how ludicrous is that? And for you, James, as an investor, would you be investing in any company that does not bake into its architecture an inclusive mindset, just which Susanne spoke about, because they're being blind to a market? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we've been, all of business has been open architecture on many different fronts. It's now time for companies to be open architecture on its most important capital, it's human capital. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not any company that's not open architecture from a product or software standpoint it's failing. And so the answer is no, right? It's not just doing good, it's just not understanding your future consumer base. Like it's just right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think, oftentimes we'll talk about, ensuring that, we're hiring people with disabilities so that consumers, right, will see people with disabilities, working there, right? And there's that connection, right? And you better understand the people, who you are either supporting or serving, whatever your role, in a company is. And there is that identity, there is that human capital, there is that human connection. As a person with a disability, I'm going to choose to work with a company that embraces disability inclusion and the disability hiring. If I'm going to choose between two, I'm going to pick the one that is inclusive, specifically of people with disabilities, but is inclusive of all people. And there are those companies out there. So I think it is a bottom line thing, but I think it, it goes back to that connection, that human kindness and that decision-making process.
Yeah.
And
Well-
people are making decisions to join companies based on seeing that on websites.
Yes.
We've done some research around that. And if people with disabilities see either images of themselves or programs that are affirmatively recruiting, or that disability is in the diversity statement, they will make judgments about applying to a job in that setting rather than another, when it's visible that the company means disability is a part of the inclusion agenda in that organization, and it's evident on the website.
Particularly the younger generation, right, Susanne?
Yes.
Like it's
Yes,
a very
absolutely.
different generation, and their concept of inclusion now is very different. Like I'm 50 this year. Sorry, James, I have 17,000 gray hairs, but it's very different. It's not even whether you have a lived experience of disability or an ally for it, they judge it on full human inclusion, and they are using the power of their talent and where to put it into companies and where they spend their money even more forcefully than we would have before them.
And you look at the ADA generation, right? Many job seekers today did not know life before the ADA.
Yeah.
And so their expectations of their school environment, their work environment, their community environment is so incredibly different. And that is helping other people. I'm 54 and have 1,000 gray hairs. But I think that's where we bring the generations together. That's where we get more learning, to create what that forward-thinking younger generation may be doing, but that historical experience that, people our age and older have. So I do think it's a mix, but I love that people have higher expectations. They expect more. So we as companies have to expect more.
I have a question. I've done a fair bit of research studying living experience on the hiring funnel on a gender and race base. I don't know a whole lot about the funnel mechanisms for disabled job seekers. So one of the questions from the audience actually was similar. Is it as you see things today and going forward, and the answer may be both. Is it the top of the funnel problem to get into the hiring process? Is it the bottom of the funnel? That's the main sticking point. And then once they're hired, how are the retention statistics faring and trending over the last years, or as you think about things going forward? I mean, what are the dynamics? Educate me on that a little bit.
I'll jump in a little bit. I think, when we talk about workplace disability inclusion, we historically always focused on getting people into the workplace. And we know now you have to look across the employment process because people get in and they get stuck. The perception may be that they don't have the same, wrongly, that they don't have the same career aspirations, or they get passed over. So, we have to teach organizations to be vigilant and self-critical across the whole employment process. Inclusion occurs every day in every facet of what we do. So it's not enough just to look at affirmative recruitment. It is looking at, our salaries equitable, our advancement opportunities equitable, and do people really feel that like they belong? So, putting disability into your engagement survey every year and looking critically at how people are feeling about their work environment. It needs to be all of these things if it's really going to be a successful effort over time.
I think that for me to say is forget the funnel for a second. It still boils down to how we value human beings who are part of this tribe, this global tribe. And I want to refer to where I think that funnel at the top and the bottom and the middle of it can change. And I love what Susanne has said about being self-critical. One of the most powerful things that I've ever heard a leader say was Peter Grauer, who's the chair of Bloomberg globally. When we launched the Valuable 500 in Davos, he sat back in his chair with these 4 other CEOs, really high profile. And he said, you know, I am really proud of certain areas that we have been working towards within the inclusion agenda, but I'm not about disability. And we need to do more. And I don't really know what to do. And that moment, you could see the other 4 CEOs who were on the stage, nearly their shoulders were dropping. They went, oh, that's the same as us. And so he gave permission for this way that I think Susanne has spoken to, is to take the fear out of all of this, because it's fear that's blocking that funnel all over the place. And it's fear of getting it wrong, and fear of getting cancelled out, and it's fear of being shamed, and fear of not doing enough, and I don't know what to do. And I think that's the openness and the self-criticism that, and the self-exploration that we have to try and create, right? And they're the only people who can create that, I believe, are the leaders. I really believe that they have to create those cultures.
One of the things that may be helpful for some of the CEOs who are listening. So when I first plopped down into Ashley Stewart, I said to everyone that I needed to be taught. Was not a woman. I wasn't Black. There were some shared experiences, particularly with vis-a-vis my mother, but that was probably the least qualified person to be CEO. That would you please teach me, like help me. And I think that's one of the things that we forget. And putting my MIT hat on, the greatest scientists in the world always try to prove themselves wrong, that they are intellectually curious, that you're constantly, there's like real leadership and courage actually comes from a humility and a curiosity, just wanting to keep learning. And I think that I'm hopeful that more leaders they'll remember this, because I think a lot of leaders hesitate because they want to be perceived as knowing everything and being all knowing, and none of us is all knowing. And it's a very important point, Caroline, that you made at the beginning about it's a humility. Like humility takes a lot of courage, right? You don't learn.
No, and I think, look at none of us have the answer for any of it, but I would also say, to go back to a question you asked me at the very beginning, how do we get CEOs over the end of the line? I had to be the most vulnerable I have ever been in my life.
Yeah.
Because it was that important. No more excuses. So let me help you, you know? And so therefore I really had to speak from a place of heart and be more vulnerable for who I am as an individual, and for my fear of what happened in the world. And you know what? It's very hard to be vulnerable. It is very hard. I've spent most of my life defying my disability, overachieving because of it, despite it. And this time I had to let go and open myself up very personally. And I actually oddly think it was in that vulnerability that I wasn't weaker, I was probably stronger. And that's my my personal journey through the Valuable 500. And I actually saw an awful lot of that. And that is what gives me great hope about how things can change.
Well, we have 4 minutes left. So I was thinking maybe not to be overly structured, because I'm not a particularly overly structured person, but maybe giving each of you 1 minute to talk to our panelists and to talk about what you're working on. How best can the people listening to this be of support to you, right? To your initiatives? Like why don't you speak directly to the panelists and say, these are the things that it would be great I could use some help on or receive support for. Susanne, tough question.
Yeah, there's so many things. I mean, I feel like every day I am learning. I think support for continuing this dialogue of, I think Caroline spoke about humility. Well, I feel every day I learn more about what I don't know than what I know. And I think us talking about that and talking about where we see gems, in the things that we do. We're working with 11 national employer associations, and I go to them and say, what are your issues and who's doing a good job on things? And I think to the extent that us as a panel can continue to offer that to each other. I do think the main theme of the Harkin Institute series of bringing investors to the table is really critical. So to the extent that we can contribute to and draw from that continuing dialogue over the coming year, I think that's the perfect place for me personally to be poised in this conversation.
How about you, Merrill?
Oh goodness. Yes, to what Suzanne said. I think part of it too is, we want to, as Anthem, stay involved. We want to be in these conversations. We want people to hold us accountable. We want to hold ourselves accountable. And I think that's a really, it kind of comes with that humility, cultural humility, the ability to be vulnerable as a company and as leaders, but holding ourselves accountable. And we need people to help us do that as well, and to keep that pipeline and that discussion open. And so it is a mix of having conversations with other companies, right? Creating, those better, pipelines and funnels and systems and processes. And then it's that accountability to people, right? And keeping that discussion open and, making sure that we're talking to people with disabilities every day, because we know we are, right? But broadening that out, because that to me is a change agent when people with disabilities are part of the discussion, part of holding accountability, part of creating that openness.
Caroline, I know that you teased me about sort of talkative Irish woman. You have 38 seconds.
I don't have all the answers. Nobody does. Use your voice, share, teach. Valuable 500 will only ever succeed if we create an incredible community for learning.
If I can be helpful in any way to each of your efforts, please. It was wonderful spending time with you, and I think I can be, and I want to be helpful. I've learned a whole lot this past hour. I will say that I've been humming Indigo Girls Closer to Fine a lot these days, and there's a line in there that says, they sang, "The less I seek my source for some definitive, closer I am to fine." And it's been sort of a line that I've been really thinking about. And I've also been singing it while rereading Harold and the Purple Crayon. So I think we need to draw new lines. You need to take your purple crayon out and just draw a new window, like draw new systems. It is possible. And I think that each of you has proven that it is possible. But anyway, so it was, to the panelists, thank you. It was fun. I learned a lot. And to our host, thanks so much. And it's also my job to sort of say, this is the first of 5 more monthly panels. I hope we did a good job kicking this all off. And I think the next one will be at the end of June. It is about, it's called Competitive Integrated Employment and its Benefit to the Private Sector, which I think will build on some of the themes that we've laid out here. But with that, I'll say adieu or goodbye. And thanks for your time, everybody. It was great. Thank you.
Thanks, James.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Is it?